All right, we're joined with another super special guest. This is Pastor Kyle. Thank you for coming on, man. Really awesome to have you.
Yeah, thanks, Devin, for having me, man.
All right, so tell us a little bit about yourself. Who is Pastor Kyle?
Yeah, I'm going to be 37 soon, which is kind of weird to say because, sometimes I feel like I'm in my mid 20s still, but, I'm starting to get some gray hairs and wrinkles that won't go away. And sometimes I'll throw my back out just sleeping wrong. So, but anyways, I'm one of the pastors at Creekside Church in Tampa. And I do a lot of different things here. I'm one of the teaching pastors. I lean into a lot of family ministry. I do a lot of shepherding stuff and just a lot of general leadership things within the church. And I've been here for, man, 3.5 years now, and it feels like it's just flown by. And I've been married to Bree for 14 years, and I have 3 sons that are 9, 7, and 4. And our house is super loud and super fun.
Yeah, for sure. I know it's been awesome seeing you come to Creekside, and I know you grew up in the Tampa Bay area, so getting to come back and begin your journey here again is really cool. So
Yeah,
why don't you tell us a little bit about your testimony, kind of leading up into when you finally decided to go into ministry? Kind of get us up to
man.
speed.
Yeah, so I came to Christ when I was 7 years old, and I was not born in a Christian home though. My family, when I was probably, I don't know, end of being 6, going into turning 7, around that time, kindergarten, first grade, um, my family, my parents, and it was just my older brother and I at the time. My younger siblings weren't even born yet. My parents were just all of a sudden. You look back on something like this, and it's only the Holy Spirit just drawing somebody to the Lord, right? But my parents thought, you know what, we want to do something like that just feels like worth it, and we want a good environment to raise our boys around. And they just knew a few Christians, and they had both had some church experiences as kids, but by no means were they in. They didn't grow up in Christian homes where, or even just cultural Christian homes that thought we need to be faithful church attenders and stuff. It was just like little bits in here. Maybe they were invited by a friend a couple times when they were a kid, and my parents thought we need a good environment to raise our boys around. So they knew a couple Christians, and they said, like, let's just start going to a church. I remember church shopping, even though I was really young. I remember trying out different churches, and it was like, well, we've got one aunt over here who's goes to this type of church over here. My dad had this really great friend from work that went to this kind of church over here. And I remember visiting those different Sundays until they finally landed on one that I think another friend from my dad's work had recommended that they'd heard a lot about. And they go and they hear really great preaching, and they're like, this is it. And so we all started going to this church, and I plug into like the kids' Sunday school class, and I start hearing the gospel for the first time. And what was really neat was the Lord was already getting a hold of my parents in a way, but they really didn't have a professed faith. They knew about God, but they didn't know him personally. And my older brother's 2 years older than me. All of us around the same time gave our lives to Christ as an entire family. And it was really cool because I remember like we actually walked forward during an invitation all at the same time because we had been talking about it at home, that we were just ready to go and like make it official, talk to a pastor. I remember the pastor that I spoke with, and I remember what we talked about. And then I remember all of us as a family getting baptized together on the same day. And that was pretty neat. And what was funny is at the time, my mom was pregnant with my younger brother when she got baptized. And so for my younger brother's like 7, 8 years of his life, he thought, I've already been baptized, I'm good, because he was in my mom's belly. And we're like, no, but it doesn't really work that way. So anyways, fast forward there, the church just really discipled me well. And I think it's just really neat to see when you grow up in a context like that. And then you have great people in a student ministry that are just surrounding you and mentoring you. The Lord was building a really great village around all of us. And so my older brother is in ministry. I'm in ministry. My younger brother has served in churches before. He's not necessarily like a vocational minister, but he's been on staff at churches. Is a big heart for ministry himself. And my younger sister also walks with the Lord. And it's just really cool to see what the Lord will do when you've got two parents who are just brand new at walking the faith, but then the Lord brings a bunch of other people around y'all to grow all of you in the faith. It was pretty cool. And so it was in this context that I was a kid who was so hungry to be at church. I truly loved the Lord, and I really never had one of those like rebellious phases. I remember just such a personal connection with the Lord that I wanted to do what was right in the Lord's eyes. And I wanted to resist temptation. And I even was made fun of for my faith in middle school and high school, but I just wanted to walk with the Lord more than anything. And that spurred me to really start serving a lot. I was at the church throughout the week, just hanging around the church offices with student pastors and doing whatever I could do to be around that place. It was, in a way, it was kind of a refuge. And that just exposed me to a lot of great ministry, I guess, and really started to develop a heart for ministry. And for really just reaching other people with the good news that was just absolutely had changed my life and was still changing me. And I wanted to see other people take steps toward knowing Christ, loving Christ, feeling the love of Christ. And I wanted to start discipling others because it just felt natural to do. And so even by the time I was in high school, I was leading a group of younger boys and discipling them and leading like Bible lessons at camp and whatnot. And then in college, I really wanted to do my own thing at that point. I'd done a lot of ministry. I'd been on so many mission trips. I even actually lived overseas in China for an entire summer. And but I was scared to death to go into ministry as my vocation. And I actually had a wrestling match with the Lord for a few years throughout college about it. I was like, it's not like I'm chasing my own sinful dream here, Lord. I just want to do what I want to do. And I was really just scared about going into ministry. And I think it's because I was so close to a bunch of pastors and whatnot at the church that I just knew the stuff that came with it. And I was afraid of it. And I was afraid of my own abilities or inabilities, really. I was afraid of, I'd seen guys get chewed up and spit out. I'd seen guys trash talked for no good reason, even though these are the same people that you had just really like ministered to and loved on. And I didn't want to subject myself to that. And so I was pursuing a career in music, believe it or not, and really just pursuing that hard. But also it was just, you could tell the Lord was putting a lot of things in my way, that things weren't working out. And hindsight, it was him just frustrating my plans and him getting my attention. So when I was in college, I started to really have another great awakening in my life, where the Lord was asking me questions like, "You've always followed me closely, and you think you've given me everything, but you're not." And I'm like, "But I live a pretty like upright, clean life." But He's like, "What about your future? What about your dreams? What about your desires? Have you really given me all of it?" And so God was really challenging me with that. And I was being honest with Him about my fears. I was seeking counsel from other people. And, another big thing was I had friends and mentors who were speaking into me saying, you do ministry so much that it affects your job, it affects your college studies. Why don't you just go into ministry? And like, you're gifted for it. You're doing it all the time. What's up? And they could tell there was something going on in there. They could tell there was a hesitancy, a resistance, a fear. And it was more than just me wanting to do my own thing. I definitely wanted my life to have deeper purpose. And I was trying to like bargain with God about what those purposes could be. And there was a 2-year, internal renaissance, a spiritual renaissance of Him just making everything come alive so much. And it really started with me just giving God little bits of obedience and turning other things over to him and practicing more like holiness and uprightness and other things, and just getting like to a point where my life was completely sold out for him. Not that it hadn't been before, but he was just showing me new ways to trust him, new ways to obey him, new ways to follow him. And so it's like he was just showing me in a gracious way, obey me here, and then I'll open a door here. Obey me here, and I'll reveal something to you. Obey me here, and I'll bless you in this other area of your life. And he's like, see how this works? Like, follow me, trust me, give things over to me, and I will take care of you, and you'll live with like more peace and clarity than you've ever had before. And so it was just this like baby steps, like training, somebody like me. The Lord was training my heart to really put everything on the table and completely trust him. So after a few conversations that the Lord lined up with people, and then I actually entered a season of fasting that I'd never done that before. I even like got wisdom on that. How do I do this? And God woke me up in the middle of the night. And I think it was, I looked over like the glowing red numbers of my alarm clock that was next to my bed. And it was like 3:23 in the morning. And I can still see those numbers in my head. The Lord woke me up. And I was like, well, I'm serving at the student ministry like function all weekend. And so I'll start fasting after that because that makes sense. And it was like the Lord was saying, stop doing things that make sense to you and stop doing things within your comfort zone. You need to give me obedience. You need to give it to me now, not when you're ready. And so it was like he woke me up and it was like, you're going to start fasting now. And I just remember like face down on my hands and knees praying and really giving a lot of things over to him. And then at the end of that weekend, we also had a missions conference at our church. And at the end of this missions conference, they just kind of gave this call, like, does anybody feel called to any form of ministry? We've got a bunch of missionaries and pastors down front visiting, and they're just here to pray with you. And they're like, all right, 1, 2, 3, stand up, walk forward, And I remember just shooting up in my seat, completely unexpected to me. My friends, my college buddies sitting next to me were like, what? And they're like, all right, he's going. And I'm like walking down there. And I remember this couple they were missionaries to Russia. I'd never met them before, never talked to them ever again. They go, you have any idea what kind of ministry the Lord's calling you to? I said, no, a big smile on my face. I was like, no fat clue, And that was the type of submission that I needed to have, was completely open-handed, whatever, for however long, wherever. And then a guy told me, he goes, you need to do ministry no matter what your business card says and not give the Lord so many conditions. So that was a big part of my personal journey into ministry. And hindsight, the thing that I tell people now is, doing music, doing anything else, I could have gotten good at those things on my own. But the Lord knew for me, he's like, I want you here, not just to be effective for me, but like, this is a safe place for you. To be completely reliant on me daily. Ministry is the only area of my life that I need God every single day to absolutely do what, music, I didn't need God for that. I could do that on my own. And that's a dangerous place for any person to be. And so ministry is the one area of my life that I know without a doubt, I need God daily to do what I need to do. And I've found incredible hope and safety and purpose in that. And, ministry is not easy at all. I'm sure a lot of people have said that on this podcast. And that's why there's a calling, is because you always go back to that. You're like, God asked me to do this. I'm going to do it. And it's not because it's easy. It's not because it's always delightful, but it pleases the Lord. And so therefore, that's what I'm in it for.
That's really, really awesome. I can think that's so much like my testimony so far. So it's really amazing. And it also goes to show we've had some crazy testimonies on here. We've had the more like this, where God just has you your whole life and he's not letting you go. And that's an amazing thing. It's an amazing, amazing, comforting thing to know that God has us right where he wants us.
Yeah.
All right. So you've now started this journey into ministry, taking step by step of faith, and God just supernaturally opening door after door. I'm sure you can testify that in your own life. So what was the first kind of full-time ministry position you held, if you want to start working your way towards that?
Yeah. It wasn't full time in the pay. That's usually how they start out. Isn't it funny? Like it's a part time on paper and it's a part time in your paycheck, but ministry is a ministry and you're going to do it um, as a, you're going to do it around the clock, all hours and evenings of the day. So at the church that I was at the time that I surrendered to the call to ministry, I was already on staff at the church, but in a non-ministerial sort of way. So I was able to actually speak with my former high school pastor, and I was volunteering in the ministry already. I was teaching a 10th grade boys Sunday school class, and counselor at camp, and a youth leader for various events and stuff. So I had a conversation with him, told him the whole story that I just told you. And he had known me since I was in like ninth grade. So there was a lot of closeness and trust there at the same time. And they had an opening for an internship, and they needed a guy. They always had a male intern and a female intern. They needed a new guy intern. And so it all just sort of lined up. And so I was the high school ministry intern there. And I just got to disciple a bunch of high school boys. I got to preach a few times, lead various things, and just gain a lot of experience, just sort of behind the scenes that I had no idea all that stuff went into it. And I had to really learn from the ground up that I wasn't going to be instantly good at things, and that I was here to learn. And it was cool because my boss, who's my former high school pastor, I think 3 months in, pulls me in for like the 90-day meeting. And he's like, hey, I think you and I are a lot alike in some of these ways. And I wasn't good at these things either. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, you seem like you're doing fine. And he goes, well, I had to learn. And I had to learn some tricks that helped me with it. So like he shared with me even some practical things to become better at things that I wasn't naturally good at. And he's like, a lot of ministry is doing the things that, yeah, God's gifted you in, but there's a whole lot that you're not naturally good at that you have to become somewhat good at because it's a part of the job. So that was my first, entrance into the circus, and that was 2009. And I was also had just been on a mission trip where I met who I knew was going to become my future wife. She was already in full-time ministry, so that was a big thing to look for. If there's any single guys out there listening to this, finding a helpmate to do ministry with, the thing that I always counsel young dudes on is that she needs to already be showing that she wants to be in ministry, not just saying that she wants to marry somebody in ministry. It's a big difference there. So when I met Bree, she was already in full-time ministry, completely full-time, support raising, on the road traveling with a ministry team. So we knew we wanted to get married. So I actually valeted cars for like 25 hours a week, working 7 days a week to try and save for an engagement ring because the internship paid probably minimum wage, So I was just working my tail off, and I was 21. We got married when I was 22, and then we moved to Atlanta in 2010, like mid 2010. And I was at a really great church there where they had a residency program. So it was like, you've gotten your feet wet in ministry before and an internship, but this is like a full-time thing, like a doctor in his residency. We are going to make you like a mini pastor here with a safety net and a lot of leadership over you. And this is a training program that we're going to graduate you from and then send you out somewhere. And so that was almost 3 years there doing that. And it was the smartest move I've ever made in ministry. Like, I just knew practice makes perfect. And so I wanted more investment. I wanted more practice. And I owe so much to that church and that program. So much so that like here at Creekside, we've created something similar, and we've brought in a couple guys through it. We've got a resident right now, and so yeah. And then I pastored in North Carolina in Charlotte for 5 years, doing some various things there at that church. Um, then I church planted for 2 years in Pittsburgh with a team of other people, and that was a pretty wild experience. And the second half of that was during a pandemic, so that was crazy. And then I burned out from ministry with a capital B, and it was also during the pandemic. So I had no clarity on what the Lord wanted me to do next. I was burnt to a crisp and I was exhausted. And my wife said, "You need a sabbatical. And I'm going to pray that God finds a way to give it to you." And so it was essentially during the pandemic that I took 11 months out of vocational ministry to really decompress and heal and unpack some bags. Because when I told the Lord I'll go into ministry, it was for a lifetime. And I wanted to finish the race. And so I did a lot of work, a lot of intentional work on myself to get myself healthy, so that I could re-enter ministry without baggage, with a full tank of gas. And the ending that sabbatical is what led me to Creekside 3.5 years ago.
Awesome. So that whole time was just growth and you humbling yourself to learn. I think that's something that so many people can learn from, is that you don't know everything. You're not good at everything. And I think that was something that I was talking with Hunter yesterday. He was like, we know, you know what you're good at. You know what you're not good at. He's like, that doesn't give you an excuse to not get better at what you're bad at. So you got
Yeah.
to keep going, get better at things that you're not so good at.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's a hard thing to do, but it's something that is such a blessing and that God can use in amazing ways and keep you humble.
Yeah.
So you've gone through this training program, and now you have been a pastor at two different churches. You had a church plant. What did it look like to bring you to Tampa, back to Creekside, or to Creekside?
Yeah. At that point, we had 3 kids, and um, we had always been very like just open-handed with the Lord to say, we'll go wherever, do whatever for however long. And to not really just constantly be looking for the next opportunity over my shoulder. I know some guys can go into ministry thinking these are just all career stepping stones. And for me, it was always just about wanting to be faithful with whatever the Lord's called me to. And so much so that's sometimes to a fault, where I don't look up enough to see, like, is God wanting me to do something else, or am I just bound to duty here? Somebody told me in that time that I was praying about leaving the church plant, and I was also just burned out, so I just needed some reflective time. They said the enemy of your next calling is your current one. And or a better way to put it, the enemy of your next calling is your previous one, because you get bound to the fact that, oh man, I was called here. But then like the Lord might move you on, and you have a hard time like finding a category for that. So I think by the time I was looking for what was next in my life, and I was not working at a church, I was not pastoring, that gave me just incredible clarity, but also sometimes if you're frustrated at some place and you're ready to leave, you're not going to always make the most sound decisions. But I just knew I don't want to jump from one ship that's got a bunch of holes into the next closest passing ship that's got a bunch of holes in it too. I wanted to make a really wise decision, but also just a really wise move for my family long term. And so we just prayed some specific prayers that the Lord would plant us somewhere, because the longest tenure that I'd had was 5 years. And for someone in their mid to late 20s, 5 years is a long time at one spot. And I did various things while I was at that church, and we actually were really comfortable at that church. The Lord was the one that pushed us out and asked us to go plant. It was the last thing I ever wanted to do. The Lord was asking me to get out of the boat. But then I was like, all right, I want to experience like more long-term shepherding. and I want to set my family up for success where we live next. And I was also praying for some very specific things in a church and in a role. And at that point, I was early to mid 30s. And so it's a very different time in life. They say like 33 is a really important transition year for most men. There's a whole lot of self awareness that usually comes. The older I get, the less confident I get. And that's probably a good thing. Like we're all so overconfident in our 20s. But the older I get, the more insecure I get. And I say insecure in a good way, that it makes you like, I don't know, think through decisions better. It makes you think about what do I need to get down to doing for the Lord that's going to be the most effective thing for the kingdom and the healthiest thing for me, because those things should go hand in hand. And so I was looking for a healthy church dynamic, and I was looking for a healthy role that I could really you spend the first decade or so in ministry figuring out what you're good at, not good at. You still have to do some of the things that you're not good at. But early in ministry, you have a good idea of things that you think you'd like to do, and you call those your giftings. But you're not necessarily always gifted in those things, because gifts might be given, but they're also developed. And so, at that point, I knew what I was really good at, and I knew what I didn't need to focus on. And I was looking for something that I could get down to doing the things that God had wired me to do, so that the church would benefit, and so that I could do them with longevity. So that was part of just even forming my role here at Creekside. There were some things that they were wanting to be done and hire a person that could do those things. But then there's also like they needed just another shepherd, and there were so many different things to tackle. And so my conversation centered a whole lot around here's what I'm gifted to do. Here's what I think God wants me to be focusing on over the next 10 years of my life or so. Here's the things that we're really passionate about right now that we weren't passionate about 10 years before, or we had no right to be passionate about 10 years before, So a lot of that nuanced conversation, but then at the same time, just talking about what kind of church do we want to be a part of. And then Creekside was like, we're looking for a specific type of person and pastor to be able to fit this team. I'm sure you've talked about it on your podcast before. Like our church, Creekside Church, is an elder-led church, but it's not the elder-led where there's a greater amongst the equals elder. It is completely Knights of the Round Table. And so there's a lot of collaboration. There's a lot of humility that has to come with that. And there's a lot of brotherhood that needs to happen in order to make that a healthy collaboration. And so knowing what I was signing up for as well, this is not your typical church model. But I was kind of like looking for something that was a little bit more unconventional in that way. And so the Lord really answered a lot of those specific prayers, and he led us here. And just, being able to really feel like I was planting some roots. We had moved around enough that I was like, I don't want to go somewhere new. That sounds exhausting. So going somewhere familiar, like my hometown, serving with people that I've served with before when I was in college, that was wonderful. And my middle child, who's 7 now, but when we moved here, he had lived in 4 states by the time he was 4.5 years old. And it was showing. And I needed to give my kids a little bit more stability. And so that was something that I just begged God for. And I wasn't bitter about anything that had happened and like the steps, but like we loved the adventure of living in a lot of different places. But we were just asking God for a different type of season, and I feel like he's given that to us here. So I guess I also learned to ask God for some very specific things.
Oh, man, that's really cool. I love Creekside. It's one of my favorite things, though, is the expositional teaching of the word, and I love that so much. Were the other churches you helped run, were they expositional, or were they more topical?
Let's see. The one that I was at in North Carolina was more expositional for sure. And that's really it's cool because you take little pieces of everywhere you've been that has helped shape you and form you. And I'm really grateful for all of them. They all did great things for me. Um, the church I was at in North Carolina, we did a lot of team sermon series preparation, and that was fun. And I realized how much I like collaboration and how much clarity and safety there is in collaboration. But then at the same time, how much clarity and safety there is in expositional preaching as well. And so I did a lot of it there. When we were church planting, that's a little bit different too. Like we did, maybe like a mini series in the book of Acts, but it wasn't exhaustive. I don't think it's necessarily the smartest thing for a brand new church plant for people who are brand new in a city to just say, all right, we're going to pick the book of Mark and we're going to spend 2.5 years in it. You need something that's a little bit more visionary as far as this is who we are as a church that we're forming, and this is what it means to be. And the other thing too, in that context, we had people that were coming from a completely unchurched context, or maybe they're coming from like Catholicism, because Pittsburgh is a semi-Catholic city. So we had to do sermon series that were like basic stuff, like what does it mean to be a church member? What's baptism? What's this? And so we had to use our Sunday morning sermons for that. But we always made sure that it was not just eisegetical preaching, but not even like topical in the sense that like it was like Christian self-help. We just had to craft them in a way that we were trying to get like 5 or 10 years of, like church experience and doctrine into people who hopefully they'll stick with us for the next few months. Nothing prepared me for preaching in a church plant context. A lot of other things like you've heard about, you talk to other church planters, you get trained on. Nothing prepared me for being on a stage and preaching to people that you're hoping become long-term church members. But everyone everyone mentally is sitting in the audience with their arms crossed going, do I want to follow this guy? Do I want to listen to this guy? Because they don't have to. Like, you're a church plant. They're checking you out. No one's super committed yet. And that no one prepared me for the lack of commitment. That people were really like careful about how much they would give of themselves, and how much they would buy into the vision and how much they would fellowship with you. And so that really like was hard because you're just pouring yourself out to these people in so many different ways. You're trying to pastor them. You're trying to preach. You're trying to do all these things. And then the minute they don't like something, they're gone. And that hurts. And that happens a lot. And so nothing prepares you for that. And then coming to Creekside, where we preach through books of the Bible, without skipping verses, not the hard verses. And for some reason, for the past 3.5 years, I feel like most of the really weird texts, I'm the one that like somehow draws that straw where it's like, all right, this week we're talking about divorce. All right, here we go. Like nobody wants to do that. And I'm like, so it's like a running joke. I always get the weird ones or the ones that it's like, what does this mean? What does Jesus mean when he says that? But I'll add this to a really long answer about like just exegetical, verse by verse preaching. I said there's a lot of safety, there's a lot of clarity in it. It's also very challenging because there's no way that any of us know that much. And so every sermon that you write is bringing you outside of your comfort zone because most of it's not the normal stuff that you've probably preached before. And so there's no way that you can know everything that you need to know. And so there's a whole lot of research that goes into every sermon that's crafted. But there's also a whole lot of collaboration. And I kind of bring back to the collaboration that I had at my church in North Carolina. I learned to love it. And so I was a natural collaborator. I'm constantly talking about what I'm thinking about, what I'm going to preach. And I'm calling people and bouncing things off. My wife, I'm like almost like preaching a mini sermon to her in the kitchen. And she's giving me feedback on clarity or not clarity. And so all of our sermons here at Creekside, anybody gives you any sort of compliment on a Sunday after you walk off the stage and you're hanging out and people are saying, that was amazing. And I say, I wish I could take credit, but it was a group effort. And because that's really how we do things. Even like every sermon that's preached, we're all hashing it out behind the scenes ahead of time. That even some of the things I'm saying are not all my initial thoughts when I read that text, but it's this collaboration. Oh, you know what? This guy said this, and I never would have saw that. But it's amazing how we give a lot more of a full presentation that way of what that passage is saying, because you've got many different minds coming to the same passage and offering their little bits that the Lord's giving them. So it's not just spirit led, but it's like group spirit led. It's really cool.
That's amazing. That's such a cool way, like way Creekside works, where it's elder led, not just one, but multiple. Is you all get to have that relationship where you can feed off each other. It's not all on one pastor, and like I think it's such a cool model,
Yeah.
and it's definitely biblical. And one of the things that I just want to real quick as we're wrapping up, your biggest piece of advice to a lot of people as they're beginning their kind of walk into being a pastor, or not one of them, but is listen to comedians to
Yeah.
understand how to read people.
You remember that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
want to go into that for a minute?
Yeah. It was when I was a resident. So there's this guy. He Many people that are listening to us has probably heard of this guy because he's like the vice president of Student Leadership University. His name is Brent Crow, and both of the church that I started out as an intern, and then my next church that I was doing a residency at, although they were different states, they were big mega churches that had tons of resources. They were able to bring in some pretty big people. And so for a student ministry sermon series for both of these churches, we both brought in Brent Crow. And so I'd known him from before. I knew Brent since I was in high school, I think. And so I was just in charge of he'd flown in to speak, and I'm just there making sure he has everything he needs. And, but for me too, as someone who is hungry, I'm like, it's always been a part of who I am to seek a multitude of counsel. I'm a great question asker. And I think that just comes from curiosity of childhood. My favorite question was why, and it probably got me in a lot of trouble as a kid. But I wasn't trying to challenge. I was just trying to learn and categorize things in my brain. So I'm like anytime I'm in the room with somebody that's more experienced in anything than me, I'm trying to interview them. I actually do this. This is an aside, sorry, but I interview a bunch of old guys in ministry. I'm talking guys in their 70s, 80s, and I ask them the stuff that I feel like I need to know. I'm not asking 45-year-olds. I'm asking 75-year-olds, because they're going to give you a way better, more wise, clear answer, because they've actually really figured it out. And so even the same thing about I interviewed a bunch of adult pastors' kids who are both walking with the Lord and not walking with the Lord. Because I'm like, I've got 3 kids that are pastors' kids, and I want to make sure that when they're adults, they walk with the Lord still. So anyways, that's just me. I'm a natural question asker, interviewer. So I'm with Brent Crow, and I'm asking him all kinds of stuff. And he's a very great communicator. It's one of his strong suits. And I think it helps that in his context, a lot of what the type of ministry he does, he's not preaching a sermon every single week. So when he comes and he's a guest speaker at a church, he's probably preached that one 10 times, right? And he's really been able to hone in and work on it. And so there's a level of understanding that comes with that. Like the guest speaker is going to pull out his best that he's done a million times, and it's going to be the best ever, right? I said, how can I become a better preacher? Just what's your, from the hip thing? And he goes, listen to stand-up comedians. And that was actually info that he had gotten from one of his mentors that, was an amazing, speaker to did camps with 2,000 students in the room, all that kind of stuff. Listen to stand-up comedians. I go, really? That's not at all what I was expecting, don't go and listen to John Piper sermons and all, wasn't that. He goes, if you think about a stand-up comedian, they have, they have their bit that's rehearsed in their head, but they know how to read a crowd. And they know how to make that funny to that crowd. And so he said they can read a room, they can read an audience, and they can adapt on the fly, and they can keep their attention. Otherwise, they're not coming back. And so, applying that to preaching, it's one, knowing your audience is huge. So even if you're going to be a guest speaker somewhere, if you can ask some questions from whoever's bringing you in, so that you have a better understanding of who's going to be there, right? Um, but then also like kind of reading the crowd. And there's a joke that you might tell in the first service that fell flat because that first service is filled with people that are generally empty nesters and older. But the next service is full of a bunch of millennials, and that joke sings, you know? Um, so it's just learning stuff like that, and then your pacing and your rhythm and how to even time stuff. There was a guy that I was at a men's conference. He was kind of like slowing down as he's delivering stuff, and then he waits and he says like his joke, and then it's this really long pause, and it made you think actually about what he just said, and it made it that much more funny. And so the laugh was actually delayed because you realized that was a joke that he wasn't just rapid firing. I'm like, this is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. For the rest of the evening, he had us in the palm of his hand. I want to listen to this guy more because he's making this fun for us, you know, and talking about God's word doesn't always have to be serious. It can be engaging and fun. So all that to say, there's a level of like the dynamic, the reading the crowd. And during COVID, when you had to preach to a camera, that was the hardest thing for all of us because we were getting no feedback whatsoever, and it sounded so canned, and we were just so excited for that era to be over. So yeah, sorry, long answer there, but yeah, learning to really just adapt on the fly like that, even though you know you want to stick to your notes and everything. Um, content is everything, but content without good delivery is you can have the best content in the world, but that doesn't matter, you know.
Yeah, for sure. So I always like asking this question kind of as we're done. But is there something that our viewers can be praying for you specifically for?
Oh man, good question. Um, let's see. I would say, you know, right now we are experiencing at Creekside Church really crazy rapid growth, and sometimes you don't realize that when you're just kind of head down in it. We of course we all know we're growing like crazy because of the growing pains that come with that. Um, but I was talking with an old friend of mine that I served with in North Carolina. I'm like, how are things at that church? I was at that church for 5 years, so I still care about it, you know. And I was remembering how many people we were running on a Sunday when I was there on staff, and then how they're doing now. And that was like, I left that church in 2018. So, you know, six or 7 years ago, it was running those numbers, and now they're running those numbers. And the bookend, the starting number, and I don't want to talk numbers, but the starting number when I was there and the number that they're running now are what we were running as a church 2.5 years ago at Creekside to now. And we have 1/3 of the staff that that church has, and it happened in 1/3 of the time. And I was like, that's uncomfortable growth. You know, that's like, I'm going to go gray early kind of growth. And of course, we're like grateful to the Lord, all that kind of stuff. But then there's also the weight that you carry as a local shepherd, where you're like, I want those, that growth is not numbers, those are souls, those are people, that's family members. And so we want to make sure that we're shepherding well and remaining healthy while we do it. So I guess that's my prayer request, is that we can shepherd well and remain healthy with whatever God's throwing at us right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It was amazing having you. I'm so thankful for just the man you are, and you've poured into me a lot, and I'm so thankful. So thank
Thanks.
you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For sure. Anytime, anytime. And I'll see you guys next episode.